Thanks so much for joining this panel, Get Out of My Feet, Child-Centered Strategies to Enhance Well-Being and Agency on Social Media. I'm Aurelia Tamo-Larrieux. I'm a professor at the University of St. Gallen, incoming professor at the University of St. Gallen, professor at the University of Lausanne at the moment on digital and computational law, and I direct the legal design and code lab. I'm here today in my capacity, if it works, yes, as the co-PI of this project. COCODA, and we have other representatives of the COCODA project here, notably in the front and here in the front row, so I'm very happy about this. This is a project funded by the Swiss National Science Foundations, co-led with Simon Meyer, Konrad Kolnig, Gijs van Dijk, and Elena Simpel from University of St. Gallen, the ODI, and Maastricht University. And the COCODA project stands for this acronym, Concentration of Control and Data. And within this project, we study the systemic risks of dominant online platforms. And so what we really try to do within this project is to bring together, such as you see here also represented, this expertise from computer science and from law to develop what we call techno-legal methods for platform accountability, in order to provide better ways, not only for research, but also for regulators and civil society to access and assess also platform data, leveraging here also the tools and the rights that we have under the DSA. And within this project, this COCODA project, one important line of work has been to focus on children, because children are not simply, another category of users, but they're also right holders, learners, developing persons, right, who have agency, autonomy, and whose well-being and agency is very important, and the design choices of digital platforms have an impact on those parameters. And so this has really led us also kind of to think a bit more broader, not just about these techno-legal tools, but really think also a bit more about techno-legal educational approaches. So also understanding how our tooling and our research can support educators, institutions, families, and children themselves in building safer and more empowering digital environments. And this is also the motivation for this panel today and the leading questions that we set out to discuss together also with you, happily taking your inputs on this once all the input presentations are being done. And so these questions are really very much centered first around like what do we know or what do we have as child-centered strategies and approaches? So like what does exist? How can these techno-legal tools provide and here strengthen our ability to understand and assess the digital ecosystems that we have with a focus on children? How can we, with customizable user interfaces, also contribute to these child-centered digital markets? And then finally, also thinking a bit larger and within the discussion with hopefully all of you, also at what roles institutions play here in supporting academia, civil society, and regulators within that space. And so the aim of today's discussion is centered around these questions that are our guiding questions for the next hour, and to really think how to constructively about the infrastructure, the tools, the rights, the institutional responsibility needed here to support children's agency and well-being in the digital environment. And to do that, we have this wonderful set of speakers, which I'm very happy to be able to introduce now to you. And I'll introduce the speakers in the order of the contributions, each addressing a specific part of the questions that I just laid out. So first, here next to me, we have Sandra Cortesi, who is a Rudolf Mösbauer Assistant Professor for Participation and Diversity at the Technical University of Munich. She leads the Youth and Media Lab and the Creativity Lab, also in partnership with the TUM think tank. And her research for many, many years and practice has been on young people and young people's digital life specifically. She has worked on topics such as information quality, well-being, safety, privacy, digital skills, on many different kinds of technologies.
You feel old.
Sorry. No, she's very young. She's also a faculty associate at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and yeah, where she was actually leading the team before joining TUM more recently. So thank you so much for being here, and we look very much forward to your contribution. And after you, like Luka Bekavac, who is a computer science researcher and PhD candidate at the University of St. Gallen, will be talking about techno-legal too specifically. His work has been focused on AI, social media, algorithmic auditing, societal effects of digital systems. And in his recent research, he has examined not only child-centered design strategies and approaches, but also looked at the creation of filter bubbles, how young people are navigating social media more generally, and auditing of social media platforms. Thank you also very much for being here and representing part of the COCODA team also today. We have also Ulrik Lyngs here next to us. Thank you so much, also you, for joining. He is a research fellow at the University of Oxford and the co-founder of the Reduce Digital Distraction project, so short RED with 2 Ds. And he will talk also a bit about this project. So RED really helps students and staff, but also parents in higher education to manage their time and attention on smartphones or other devices such as laptops. And he is trained across cognitive psychology and computer science, and his research explores really how these insights from behavioral science can inform the design of digital platforms that better respect human attention, self-regulations, and cognitive limitations. Thank you very much for being here. And last but not least, we have Michael Veale. Michael Veale is professor of technology law and policy and the vice dean of education of innovation at the Faculty of Laws at the University College London, UCL. His work sits at this intersection of computer science, information law, technology policy, human-computer interactions with a particular expertise in privacy, data protection, machine learning, AI, digital tracking, and privacy-enhancing technologies. And his research has focused also very much on how digital technologies create intensive challenges of power, justice, and fundamental rights. And we will talk more also about the redesign and rethinking of digital platforms more generally. With that, I would like to pass it on to Sandra directly for your first inputs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Aurelia. Actually, really fun to be here. One of our first panels together, I would say, even though we have known each other for 20 years, so that's cool. Bringing 2 expertise together. So I am Sandra, a psychologist, professor at the Technical University of Munich, as Aurelia just mentioned, before 15 years in the US doing mostly research. But today I will be very brief because I think the examples my colleagues are going to talk about are much more interesting because they are practical examples of how they are doing child-centered work. Mine is more to kick us off and see what is actually child-centered work or what are child-centered strategies. For me, I'm a professor for participation. So for me, it's the topic was given in a way to me, child-centered strategies. I mostly talk about participatory methods or participatory strategies. We do participatory research at TUM. And to me, it's slightly different, the two. You can do child-centered, not participatory. And you have on your left, you have a definition of what I kind of see as child-centered. So child-centered approaches or strategies recognize children as experts in their own experiences and place the child's needs, perspectives, voices, and developmental stage at the core of decisions and interventions. Participatory to me is slightly different in the sense of you actually do it in an interaction with young people. That can take many many forms. It can be from maybe more one-way extractionistic, it might be to negative frame, but extractionistic to co-production or co-design. And I think we will see examples that lean towards co-production or co-design. But yeah, there are multiple models without judging. If you're interested in more models or formats, also how other organizations can work with young people or children, I work mostly with 12 to 18-year-olds. We publish in this report 15 different ways of how you could do it as an organization with an actual kind of step-by-step instruction of how you could do it. It has there from participatory research to labs to other formats, really 15. I have no time. And you can do that in research. There are good examples from research, from policy making. I think there are really many interesting examples. And also in product design. So I think you can do child-centered or participatory across sectors, and I think, or across institutions. That's something we will also come back to. Happy to talk about these examples in more detail. The tricky thing in both formats is if you do child-centered often assumes that there are adults involved. The adult centers the child in most cases. And maybe one consideration is the adult in the right position to do that, has the right mindset? And this is a new study we just did in Switzerland, and a report that shows, for instance, when we talk about, in this case specifically AI, but you could also talk about digital environments more broadly, adults, for instance, tend to be much more concerned than children. I'm not saying that concerns are not valid, but they come at it from a different point of view. And if the goal of child-centered is to center the child's needs and their perspectives, are you in a good position to do that? Are you able? Do you have the right mindset, the right skills, the right training? So maybe we can come back to that, take a look at the report. Aurelia asked me to talk more about this report we published a couple of months ago. It's called Frontiers in Digital Child Safety. Urs Gasser and I, we were the co-editors of the report. It was written by 40 child safety experts, trying to figure out where in this very heated, we heard the panel before, in this very heated conversation can we actually make a contribution. And very much also in spirit of being child-centered. So the report has 4 foundations, one of which is centering children, but the other 3 are, respecting the rights, agency, and well-being as foundations for any kind of digital child safety work one should do. And the report focuses on 4 areas. Again, no time today, but it looks at how you can foster trust. It looks at help-seeking approaches. It looks at on devices, so what can you do at the device level, not at the platform level. And it looks at education. How can child safety education advance or look like? And the results here are from the report, so I just picked 4 on each slide, essentially an element that talks about or brings us back to this child-centered. What we learned in this trust chapter or approach is that things work best when you do it in collaboration with young people. That fosters trust. So can you do child centering in collaboration with young people? Other points here. In the help-seeking area, we learned also a couple of things, but for child-centered or child-centered strategies, 2 points are relevant. One is young people want to be centered, but doesn't mean always visible or on the record. So sometimes they want to have ways to be centered, but anonymous. So help-seeking tools that are anonymous. And then I think we will come back to that in some of the examples, particularly when it's about flagging. The role of peers are hugely important. I think I'm preaching here to the choir, but I think that's another element to be considered. On-device approaches, a lot of findings there as well, but centering children and their needs often also means doing it without much work for them. So strategies that are by default or setting the right parameters for a program by default are hugely crucial. And I think, again, here we might come back to that. And then last point I would say is the importance of involving children more actively, not just centering them, but actively involving them, and particularly in the educational context. We saw that if you co-design educational materials with them, curricula, lesson plans, and the like, they're just much more likely to be meaningful to them and work well. I think that we will come back to. So, yeah, essentially my contact info, but hopefully that kicks us off.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Sandra, for laying us the foundations and the different tools and the insights from the report, which really is really the basis for us to start and think and further discuss about these tools. And I think it's great to connect now with Luka to go into practice and what that can mean.
Sure, thank you, Aurelia. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about Flag and Save, which is a techno-legal tool which we designed with those child-centered design elements in mind. But before I do that, I want to go over a little example with all of you today. So let's all imagine a child on a platform currently. And this child might see unwanted content. So it might be trapped, for example, in the filter bubble with like where the recommender system recommends more and more content which the child simply does not want to see, or harmful content. So for example, content which is awful but lawful, car crashes and all of those other examples which we also heard before in the panel, or also strict illegal content where also the Europol panel showed us a lot of examples which I don't want to bring up again. So what is supposed to happen next year? And from a legal perspective on paper, the answer is pretty reassuring, right? So on the right-hand side of the slides, we have different kind of articles within the DSA, which are designed to exactly step in at this point of time. So we have, for example, Article 16, the takedown and notice mechanisms. So users should have the right to report harmful or illegal content to platforms. Platforms have to take a look on the content and then take it down. In case platforms are not taking down the content, users can actually enter a complaint handling mechanisms under Article 20. So they can challenge the decision. They have 6 months for this, and platforms have to take another look. And even then, if the platform does not take down harmful or illegal content, users can use Article 22, which are trusted flaggers, so special entities under the DSA, to report this content again. They will have a look. They are like a out-of-court dispute settlement body also, so an independent body. And they can, if they deem the content as harmful, they can report this to the platform again, and the platform has to take it down with stricter enforcement. What about unwanted content? So for example, if the user is trapped in a filter bubble where more and more of the kind of content which the child or the user just does not want to see is being resurfaced to the feed. There, with Article 27, the recommender system, transparency and agency, platforms should design also options for users to use not profiled recommender systems. So to have more agency about the content which is actually being recommended to the user. And also Article 28 of the DSA, which says platforms should ensure a high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors on their services and on their platforms. So how does this look in practice? Because minors do not see much from the regulation, right? They see something from the implementation by platforms if they try to be compliant with the regulation. So on the left-hand side of the slide, we see the different kind of things which platforms did within the last 2 years to actually comply with the DSA. So here, for example, we have the report button or the show me less button, which users can click if they see harmful or illegal content. Our own research in Kokoda shows that those buttons are often buried within menus and not easy to find for users, especially also for children, which often do not know how personalization works on platforms. To give an easy example there, we conducted a user study recently where we created different kind of filter bubbles with sock puppet accounts. So on Instagram directly, we had different kind of accounts which interacted with only content of one kind of topic. So for example, football or get ready with me. So every single video which got recommended was about this topic. And then we asked children to actually use those mechanisms, like the report button, to escape the filter bubble. So to personalize their feed, to actually see some other kind of content. And younger children, especially those between 12 to 14 years, really struggled with finding those kind of buttons, as also to find out how does the personalization actually work. So they often use counterintuitive practices, for example, commenting on posts, show me less of this. But unfortunately, the semantic meaning of the comment is not being used by platforms to personalize content. So this is being used. So if you comment on a post, this is only like a positive engagement signal. So even more football content was recommended to them. Also, there's other research by Mozilla or Panopticon, which talks about, does this button even work in practice, right? Where they actually test the button. So even if a user would find it, does the feed actually change over time? And what they found out that in the short term, yes, but then after some time, more and more of this kind of problematic content resurfaces to the child's feed. So it's just like a short feedback loop. What about the alternative feed options under Article 27? So what we have here is platforms implemented a binary option, the For You feed or the non-personalized feed. We know it's a little bit from privacy law, where platforms tell you either we collect all of your data, you can't use the service. Pretty similar here, in this case, with platforms. Because there's also other research which shows that the personalization is actually what engages the user on the platform, right? And if you have this binary approach where you completely take away all of the personalization, users will simply not use the platform anymore. So this is like very hard for children then to choose between a engagement maximizing algorithm or engagement minimizing algorithm. There's not really like some leeway in between, okay, how do I want my kind of experience on the platform? With the third one, the external flagging and appeal mechanisms with the trusted flaggers. So if a user or a child can use an external trusted flagger to report content, if you have a look at their transparency reports, what we often see is that their decisions are being challenged by the platform. So they're saying, okay, we don't see this as illegal or harmful content. We need more time to actually access this. And then the content is taken down after 48, if not 72 hours mostly. The problem here is that the first 24 hours or 48 hours are actually the most important time frame for the freshness of the recommender system, meaning this is when content is trending. So if the content gets taken down after 72 hours, it already reached like thousands, if not millions of users, and the harm has already been conducted, right? So the content disappears from the platform, but still a lot of users already engaged with like this illegal and harmful kind of content. There's also a third layer, which is the social layer. So for example, teachers, trusted adults, media psychologists, which are also in this kind of immediate help network of children. But they're currently completely out of the loop of the system. So what you have to think about, normally this should stack up, right? So you have the legal layer, then you have the technical layer, and then you actually have like the social layer, but this is not integrated. So actually a teacher or a trusted adult never hears about what kind of content surfaced in the minor's feed and what content actually got reported. And crucially, this kind of social layer exists way longer than the DSA, right? This is where normally kids and also children would seek help from. And just because the content may be removed from the platform, the child is mostly still left with the harm. And this is exactly where we then come in. So we asked ourselves, what do we do now? How can we build techno-legal tools which actually improve upon the situation which we have currently? And I'm a sticker guy. I think you can see it on my laptop here, right? And my favorite sticker from CPDP this year, and you all have it also, is the one, move fast and fix things. And I really like this because I think with techno-legal tools, we can actually solve this problem by our own and do this. So instead of waiting on like preliminary findings of the European Commission or platforms to actually work over their design tools, we can simply use the concepts of middleware as also adversarial interoperability to build third-party tools on top of the platform to implement the safety mechanisms. And Flag and Safe is here a worked example where we did just this. So in the middle of Flag and Safe, you have Flaggy. Flaggy is a chatbot, and those kids can send posts which they deem harmful or illegal to Flaggy. And Flaggy lives directly where kids also are on the platform. So it's just like as if you would share a post to a friend on TikTok or Instagram, you can share it to Flaggy. And as soon as this happens, The report can take several routes. First, it can go down, so to the immediate help network of the child. The child can share it with their school teacher, with a trusted adult, which he configures before. It can go sideways to all of those DSA articles which I mentioned before. So for example, trusted flaggers, out-of-court disputes, settlement bodies, so that the post actually gets like evaluated by them. And it can also go upwards. So we try to then also gather the insights and send feedback to platforms as regulators, how this could work better. Because for children, actually, the takedown is not what matters most. It's actually this kind of help which he gets after he reported the content. And currently we are running this system with a primary school in Switzerland, where we're co-designing this together with children to find out how can we really build this kind of trust and agency for a system like this to work. So just what also Sandra mentioned before. So for example, what kind of sharing options do children actually want, from anonymized to like direct sharing to trusted adults to for example, also aggregated. And also, how can we build trust in the system? Because the situation should not be like that a child reports a post, a parent sees this and then says like, why are you seeing such content on TikTok and Instagram? You can't use your phone now anymore. Because it's actually not the child's fault that this kind of content is actively being recommended to it, right? And through Flag and Save, through this kind of integration model of also taking the immediate help network into account, we want to give educators, as also those trusted adults, better data and actually better decisions to act upon this. And to finish up also, just to move like one abstraction layer higher here. So what we're doing here, we are forcing platform channels open to third-party tools, where actually we as researchers, civil society, NGOs are building this kind of safety tools on top of platforms. And I think this is like a really, really great way to fix some of the problems which we currently see in the translation from DSA articles into practice. And what I also want to make really clear here, this kind of interoperability and the help which we can provide is currently constrained by legal and organizational problems. So this is not a technical problem. We can implement this, right? So if I could wish for one more article in the DSA, it would be middleware interoperability, because I think this could address a lot of the problems which we have with only one at the price of one intervention currently. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Luka, for presenting Flag and Save. I think one of the aspects here too, right, as you mentioned, this is being tested and developed with one school, one local school, really kind of adapting it to those needs. The question here also, of course, becomes a bit, how can we scale it? And how do we have other approaches to scale this? And I think with this will be a perfect segue for you, Ulrik, and your project.
What a segue. I will also talk about how we can move fast and fix things, but in relation to sort of how we can control our time and our attention, that part of the equation, and not about sort of harmful content per se. Can I just wake everybody up with a question first? Like, how many of you in this room actively use something to control your own time and attention on your smartphone and your computer? So maybe, I don't know, everything from like blocking social media, or like, okay, almost like that's half of us. Well done, everybody. And maybe everybody else was on emails. Yeah, that's right. So I've spent the last 10 years studying of all the things like blocking social media, turning phones into grayscale or whatnot. What of these things actually work? We studied this in practice in something called the Reduced Digital Distraction Workshop, where we help people just try to solve their own problems here and now, instead of waiting on 10 years of legislation that may or may not work out. And let me just start just by sharing one anecdote of a typical case we see. So I'm going to call her Emma, and this is not a picture of her, this is just a stock photo, but Emma came to one of the workshops I recently held. She's a new physics student at Oxford. She's really brilliant, but she also kind of has some personal challenges around like hyperfocus and ADHD and some intense sleep struggles. And she came to one of these workshops because she felt that social media was really derailing her life. Like she said, like throughout my entire life, I've had this thing where I like wake up at 3 a.m. and then I'll get really obsessed with something. And then in the past, before I got on social media, I would get obsessed with like making jewelry until like the sun got out, and then I would be very tired at 7 a.m. But I've had this beautiful necklace and so on. And now the problem is that now I still wake up at 3 in the morning, but I'll just be scrolling on Instagram for 4 hours. And then I have nothing to show for it. I waste a lot of time and I hate myself for it because I always try to behave differently tomorrow, but that never quite works out. And I feel really powerless because I've tried using those goddamn screen time limits and I can just override them. It just doesn't really work. And I can't just delete Instagram because I need it as a messaging app. And if I delete it, I don't know what's going on at university. So I don't know what to do. And that Social Dilemma movie on Netflix also told me that there is nothing I can do. So there we go. We see a lot of cases like Emma. Emma is not really outstanding. Like at a high level, it turns out that digital temptations have the highest rate of self-control failure of any kind of temptation we've come up with so far. In experience sampling studies, when you ask smokers who's trying to resist smoking, they say that they fail to do that about 30% of the time. Social media, you can probably guess, people say that they fail to override their urge to check social media about 76% of the time. And this is for adults. Like we know that self-control ability only reaches maturation in late adolescence. So if adults struggle to manage a difficult digital environment, we should expect it to be that much harder for children. So the good news is that self-control, or like the ability to control our own behavior when we have temptations that conflict with our goals, is really well understood in psychology. And the good news is also that the research on self-control says that the people who are better at self-control are not the people who magically have better brains or something. It's the people who somewhat paradoxically use self-control the least. What does that mean? It means that instead of trying to have superhuman willpower in an impossible situation, it's people who maybe just don't have the cake available in the first place. It's people who structure their lives so they're not constantly exposed to temptations, which also makes it easier to form the habits they want. This is a very, very, very general finding from decades of work of self-control, and we can ask ourselves how we think this translates into the digital world. And to me, it's very obvious that the conclusion is that self-control over something like social media use also requires us to be able to structure our digital lives to be supportive of how we want to be spending our time and our attention. How can we do that in practice? The other good news is that there's already lots of ideas out there. We spent the last 10 decades studying them. We call them digital self-control tools. So for example, if you find that YouTube steals your time and your attention too often, because you go on there to find something and then you 40 minutes later watch interviews with Justin Bieber's mom, with just a few clicks in your browser, any browser, you can just get rid of the shorts and the recommendations until you choose to see them. Another sort of popular tool that maybe some of you here know is a tool where you can say, hey, when I open Instagram phone, can you just ask me to take a deep breath? And then show me how many times I've already opened Instagram in the last 24 hours. And then if you click the big white button here, it's just going to close it down again. It's not quite blocking you. It's just like a speed bump to keep yourself mindful. There are hundreds of these kind of tools. They're not rocket science. It's the equivalent of what you might want to do in your physical world. If you found that your work desk was really distracting, you might just want to clean it up a little bit and give yourself a better chance of controlling your attention. Just to make it a little bit more tangible, there's like overall 4 different types of these tools. Some tools are just about showing you how you spend your time. Others are about drawing digital boundaries, like I just showed that with YouTube, but also being able to choose when and where TikTok should be available on your phone. There's tools that will... Emma complained that she couldn't do this properly with iOS screen time. There are lots of nice tools out there that will allow you to give you the friction you need. So for example, decide how many random words you should be required to type in before you can override it. A bit like deciding how, high up on the kitchen shelf you want your chocolate to be. There are tools, many of you probably know the Forest app that will give you like a psychological reward by killing a virtual tree if you use your phone, or turn your phone grayscale. And other things are just like putting sticky notes in the fridge to remind you of what it was that you wanted to do when you opened your email inbox and forgot what you had to do because there was so much stuff in there. We overall help people reflect on what they need and try to experiment with implementing these tools, and then we help them check in with themselves a month later about whether it actually worked. And then they can volunteer to donate data for research purposes. It looks a bit like this in practice when people get together. And the takeaway from this is really positive. We asked people how in control they feel on this in relation to that digital self-control, where on average people score over 50% higher a month later. And if they say that they waste over 1.5 hours less per day on their digital devices. It makes a massive difference how we structure our environments. I'll end just by saying what seems to be the most effective strategy. It's just to be able to directly change distracting features. So that means, for example, things like I showed in the YouTube case, in your browser, you can install extensions that will let you do something like this. Just say, I don't want shorts or whatever, and then they're not there by default until I choose that I want to see them. How easy this is to do, though, depends a lot on the infrastructure. So on the web, you can do more or less anything you want because the web runs on open protocols that anyone can implement. YouTube has to send HTML to you that you can modify yourself with browser extensions. And now with AI, you could just build your own extension in seconds by just asking AI to do it. Here's a video from a workshop a talk I gave about a week ago. Here's a mother who really wanted something on a specific website. I type in something into an AI in Danish, and then it just built what we wanted. Here you have something where it eats all the vowels on the website and throws down the bottom. But the rush of excitement in the room when she was like, oh, if something doesn't work for my kid, you mean I can just type a sentence in Danish into ChatGPT and it'll build something that changes it? However, of course, you also know that we can't do this on all platforms. We can do this on the web because it runs on open protocols that nobody owns. We're in a completely different world when it comes to what we can do on our apps, where we can do whatever Apple and Google decides that we should be able to do. And so, for example, Android on Chrome on Android cannot install extensions. And as we saw, Emma was like, this screen time kind of sucks. And Apple has decided that any third-party blocking tool on iOS, you can always override them with a single tap in your settings, which make them effectively useless. So I think this is where we should focus, because just like you said, we can solve challenges now if people can do this without positive effects. I think it's also more psychologically and practically empowering approach, because we don't really trust that there's so many ways to implement things in a shitty way. So do we trust Mark Zuckerberg to just be mandated by the EU to implement things in a way that we think will work? Probably not. And I think this focus also can change companies' incentives. If you know that any parent can override something they don't like that you implement, you're going to have to think twice about whether you do it. Because after I've asked ChatGPT to remove an addictive feature, I'm not going to ask it to turn it back on. And this is important for this incentivization process that we often think is inevitable. If you read, many of you probably have all read this book by Corey, where he says that this will happen unless it's being balanced out by not just regulation, but also by users' choice, which what I'm saying here that we should focus more on, and also kind of obviously workers inside the organizations might have bargaining power that's now being removed by AI. Good. Yeah, okay, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ulrik. This is also a perfect segue to talk about infrastructure. And when I saw Michael this morning, he was all about thinking about redesigning and ideas for how we could customize much more these infrastructures that are basically given to us with this child-centered approach. So thank you so much.
Thanks. I don't have slides, so I'll just leave that one up. Great. So when we chat about kids, people care deeply about them, and for good reason. They are the future. However, there are lots of separate issues that get mixed up when we think about kids and platforms, and it's often quite good to separate them out a bit, because we can't have one policy that deals with all of the many issues that children face. I mean, childhood is very traumatic in many ways, and we can't. There's lots of things we would like to imagine to get to an idealized childhood, and certainly one intervention isn't going to get us there, and maybe it's not a good idea to even get there, in full in any way. It's going to be a messy endeavor. So one of the separate issues I want to talk about and focus on is the commodification of children and childhood through platforms. And what I mean by this is a bit different then from Luke's focus, which is a bit more on safety, for example, which is a sort of separate and very important issue as well, and flagging, a bit more connected to what Ulrik was saying, I think, when we think about our own time being commodified. And one of the main drivers, and I think the drivers, particularly behind Ulrik's research for many years, has been a response to the imperative to capture people's attention. And why capture people's attention? Because you want them to look at targeted adverts or adverts of some kind, because the attention is connected to the revenue stream in varying ways, not just a simple advertising way, but in varying ways. Okay, so when we regulate and when we also just have companies respond, it's very easy to have them make something like YouTube Kids, where you say, okay, look, please don't actively allow businesses just to select children and advertise to children. Okay, good, done that, fantastic. However, that doesn't fundamentally solve our broader issue of commodification. Because what a lot of companies want, a lot of tech companies want, is they want to create future consumers. They want to shape people's behavior, they want to shape people's reliance, they want to shape people's knowledge and skills. This is a really classic software strategy. For those of you who might, so I won't make you put your hands up, but I imagine there are people in the room who have, particularly in the 1990s or so, obtained pirated editions of Adobe Photoshop. Adobe made this deliberately easy. And the reason they made it deliberately easy, some people are shaking their head, which means they definitely did it. The Adobe made this deliberately easy because, kids particularly, we're never going to pay hundreds of pounds for a license. But they would then become graphic designers, some of them, and then they'd say, I want to use this bit of software. I hate CorelDRAW. I hate, other alternatives that may be available. So really classic tactic. Hal Varian, chief economist at Google, basically wrote it up in a 1999 book called Information Rules, which was sort of a cover letter for a job at Google, who then hired him, and he shaped all of their platform strategy and the platform strategy of the world in many ways. So it's really hard to make a law that stops platforms doing this, because there are lots of patterns and just getting people addicted to certain kinds of design features and to live their life in a certain kind of preset way lends itself to the creation of future consumers. We've also seen these struggles in the world of education technology, where lots of the technologies kind of get dumped often for free on schools that don't have very much money, but they're creating future consumers of Google Docs or Microsoft Office or whatever by getting in there early and looking all very nice and charitable. But by the time 7-year-olds are using Microsoft Teams, you kind of think maybe there is an issue here. We can't turn away from that. So the reason why it's hard for law to do this is because law doesn't like easily creating a hard boundary where you say, actually, when you were a kid, you were using one thing, and when you were an adult, you're using a totally different thing that has no path dependency from the previous one. Interestingly, with this, though, social media bans are kind of a very blunt measure of attempting to do this. But they're also, an indication that we've resigned to not being able to do anything else in law. To create that hard boundary, which I would say is an important boundary to try and create, not a boundary between adulthood and childhood, but a boundary that is protective, that says the interesting stuff you do when you're a kid is not solely designed to pull you into a commercial sphere when you're an adult. It's not saying there can be no connection and there's no continuity, or that children get very different things from adults because they need to be protected. It's actually about something a bit different of that space. So one of the things here is the intervention that is the alternative to a social media ban is to say, what if systems that existed and were used when people were kids had no designs to capture them when they were adults? They were designed totally differently in a freestanding way. They weren't trying to draw them forwards. That wasn't where their commercial or even just financial model came from. And who would design those? And the kind of slightly provocative intervention I want to give is that kids should design them. And I don't just mean be involved in the design. It goes back to talking about how involved are the adults and the kids in the child-centered approach. Kids were very important in the running of bulletin boards in the proto-internet in the 1980s and 1990s. A lot of this were run by underage children across the United States. Really interesting histories of those. If you want to look at platforms, 4chan was also set up by a child. But these are not always the best examples. However, the point is, kids did operate. When I was a child, I operated forums when I was about 8 or 9 and had small communities of people who would come onto them. And you'd learn how to make a community thrive and what happens when it failed and what happened when people tried to have an exodus somewhere else because you were a tyrannical moderator. And on all of these things that all kind of came together. And I think this is all incredibly valuable. We see some of it in gaming and gaming communities, and kids thirst to create it. They thirst to create communities where they also co-design the rules. When people play in physical space, they build a treehouse. They fill the gaps of their skills with make-believe. It doesn't always look like the most convincing world, but you can create that. Now, online, we've all faced, kids and adults alike, a situation where platforms give us the design, and we just have to take it or leave it. We can't change what these fundamental underlying logics are. Now, what we can do if we're lucky, and as, again, Ulrik's research shows, you can sort of fiddle around the edges, you can accept what's there as a foundation, you can try and delete and add, knowing that you're doing so on shifting sands that the CSS classes might change the next week and it breaks your plugin. And so that's kind of a suboptimal sort of, aiming at the right aim, right? But we're stuck in that suboptimal world. So what if we had lots of transient services built at small scale by kids, for kids, built on a trusted foundation where it was quite easy to build this stuff? We've got a lot, as again Ulrik showed, of AI coding potential here. And what this does is it allows lay people to, potentially if we design it well, within boundaries, create interesting services that scale in quite modest ways that will not last very long. They might be interesting for a year or 2 years. Some kids will want to do that. Some kids don't. Again, as the study from Sandra was showing, not all kids want to sort of be the public face of doing all of this stuff. But equally, there's then agency that comes within that. And that it moves away from trying to connect every child to every other child on the internet, which was sort of a terrible idea to begin with. It hopefully can be set on maybe an endowed foundation that provides some core infrastructure that allows people to build interesting stuff on top. Now, you might think, because it's not going to solve everything. In fact, it might create more problems. Okay, how do you moderate what if a predator comes into these spaces that have been created by a child? Well, firstly, I'd say massive content moderation bureaucracies have not been very good at dealing with this problem in the first place. Secondly, governing stuff at a small scale is inherently quite easy. You kind of know who these people are, and when someone new comes in, you know that they're new, and there's a community that knows this. So I'm not saying this is a silver bullet. It creates more problems, but I think it creates problems that are more tractable in many ways. So that's sort of where I wanted to roughly leave it for now. We can chat more, obviously. I do think that we have a lot of promise in being quite radical and saying kids should just design and run things for themselves. That would be the kind of Sonia Livingston's work on playfulness is very important here. That would be the real transposition of the physical world of play into the digital world. And it would create that disconnect between adulthood and childhood on platforms which removed the possibility of commodification or at least heavily reduced it.
Great, thank you so much, Michael, for these inputs. I will open up the discussion, so please raise your hands already if you want to have the mic. I want to just jump onto kind of all of your inputs first. I very much liked your input also on this idea of by kids, for kids. Sandra was just telling me before that they've been asking, for like more children on panels and discussions also with children and bringing them in for a long time. So maybe next year we replace this panel with children instead, and we just listen, and hear them out instead of having kind of this our notion on it. And at the same time, though, and this was, I see some people that were also here in the morning sessions, you don't have just the children, right? You have concerned parents, like that was very vocal in the last session here, concerned educators, concerned institutions more generally. And I think this brings me back to this very first point that Sandra, you made and is kind of raised in Ulrik's and Luka's presentation as well, of like, there is also this balance, like, okay, if we talk about child-centered design thinking and co-developing, co-creation with the child, there is an adult in the room guiding those discussions, and we see this very clearly together with the COCODA project and Luka and Alice specifically, when we go to a specific school with a specific educator in mind. Ulrik, you talked about the parents, because you run also this workshop with parents. So how do we also balance here, these interests, and they can be conflicting, they can be aligned, but how do we go about kind of thinking about all of these actors here? So if any of you wants to respond with your wise thoughts on this topic. Go ahead.
So I think this was also raised in the last panel, but I think, and so I'm from Denmark, and in Denmark there's also very much a tradition of trying to empower kids and let kids climb trees and so on, and they might hurt themselves, and that's kind of okay. And I kind of think about the digital world in a quite similar way. I love what you said, Michael. I think the other day I met someone from a school where there was a bunch of kids who've been trying to sort of vibe code their own version of Snapchat that they could use. I think it's insane that I think the great opportunity of like a massive like social media ban or whatever is that kids should not use like an American platform as the messaging app at school. Instead, they should build their own. And there is this massive potential now with the latest advance of AI is to actually do that as a summer project, and you just use it for the school. And the kids are going to build stuff that neither the parents nor the teachers like, and that's okay. That has always been the case. The important thing is what kind of skills, just like you described, that they learn as a side effect. And over the last 20 years, we see this systematic de-skilling where by using apps, you don't learn anything as a side effect. When I was a kid, then your dad would like drive you to like a local area network party where you'd have to, you just wanted to game together, but then you have to learn stuff about cables and shit, whatever. What the potential now with vibe coding is that it's building actual stuff, and it's actually empowering to play with the things. And I think that's where we really need to focus, and we need to accept that it's okay that kids are going to do stupid stuff that and where they're going to hurt themselves, and that's okay, because the important thing is what they learn as a side effect.
I mean, to me, centering children means that you prioritize their needs and their perspective over your own. But you as an adult then have a responsibility to figure out how do you translate that into something that respects their rights, their agency and well-being, and is kind of in their best. All of these are like a Rorschach test, is like a wishy-washy terms a little bit, but that are really in their interest. And that is tricky because even the last example, when we talk about designing platforms that disconnect childhood from adulthood, is that really child-centered? Depends, you could argue, because an alternative viewpoint from a child's perspective could be, I need spaces, we can talk about social media or not, but I need platforms where I can do lifelong learning, and that what I learn at 12 is relevant at 14, at 16, at 25. And so maybe that is meaning being on one platform. So it's really complicated to do child-centered. It means like questioning your own standpoint and your own perspectives. And how do you do it if maybe what the child wants you think is not a good idea because we know better, we know different. Which in your case, I feel like we know better, like we should, but might not be what they want.
I think maybe I can just respond to that, because I think, and I think you're totally right on that. And to maybe clarify, what I meant by that is because if we're resigned to not addressing the policy issues of the adult services, if that's a resignation, then the way to achieve those goals has to be some sort of disconnect. Now, if we can agree that actually that kind of diversity and that kind of change on society should propagate throughout, I think, to create a more varied way where people's lives as an entire set of, a set of practices are not then driven to just sort of serving a platform economy. I think that's the concern with things like lifelong learning. We shouldn't be learning I just think normatively, we should not have a society, adults nor children, where we're learning to produce for a platform. I think that is like a political view that is not about child-centricness. That is an across-spanning one. Now, how do we achieve that? A disconnect is not an optimal way to do it, because we're stuck in the situation of that is the only viable method to stop that cross-development. But the best way to achieve it would be to address on both sides so that the pull is not a harmful one for society as a whole, not looking just at children. Now, I think there are limits to child involvement as well when it comes to broader political views on society. You know, there's a reason we don't give children voting rights on fundamental decisions about how our political system should be organized, because there's a level of maturity and experience we're expecting. But equally, that shouldn't mean they're excluded from many other kinds of decisions. So I feel like this is so entangled with a broader question of what we want the digital world to look like for all of us, and we can't then, there's such a risk if we take just a child-centered view to try and give up, to extract the political from that. I think we should not do that. That's a risk.
Do you want to respond?
No, we could argue for a while.
Exactly.
I'm glad to hear what others have.
But I think there are questions in the room, so I also want to give chances to the, shall I bring the mic, or is someone going? Yeah, mics are there. Oh, perfect. Oh, we have so many questions. I didn't realize. Yes, so we'll start with the questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this fascinating panel. I enjoyed it immensely. My name is Ingrida Melkaite. I worked on children's rights for a while, and now I work on the Salvos project, which focuses on child sexual abuse material investigations, which kind of puts a different lens on children's rights here. I have two short questions, I think. I found the flag and save tool fascinating. I think that's incredible, but I was wondering, have you already talked to platforms about it? How do they feel about this additional level of independent tools being integrated in their services? And then I also wondered if you already thought about funding, if this happens to be successfully scaled. And then I had a question for Sandra. I'm super happy to hear more and more people focusing on involving children. And I wanted to ask you if you have any advice for people who want to involve children in their work, how to do that meaningfully. I feel like in your expertise, in your years of expertise, you probably have seen not such good examples as well. Do you have any tips on how to truly do this meaningfully so that the involvement is not tokenistic?
Yeah, sure, I can start regarding the flag and save question. So how do platforms like those third-party tools? Not very much, I can tell you. So I mean, also with Ulrik tools, as he said, even though you build some of those tools on those open protocols of the web, they can change the HTML and CSS elements, and then those tools break. It's more or less the same also for flag and save. So we did not get approval by Meta, TikTok, or YouTube. So on those three platforms it's currently running to their official APIs, but more like a general ground that they prohibit all kinds of automated behavior within the platform. So we are currently like triangulating the legal landscape by using different kinds of DSA articles, from data access for researchers to the trusted flagger articles, to also scraping data to make this work. But of course, Flaggy lives in constant fear by being detected by the platform. Probably then he gets taken down also. So this is why I would really love to like have this more centered within the regulation, that third-party tool should also be enabled. And I mean, surely Flaggy can also be thoroughly tested before by different independent actors, but I think this would really be one way to go. Regarding the funding for this, I think Aurelia, you could answer this better. I'm just building those tools.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment this is a research project, right? So like funding is because it's also within the research scope, and understanding how these tools could work, and understanding how to apply the child centers design strategies and approaches, and what that could mean in practice. And then after that, likely these things will have a better impact if it's also somewhere lies within an institution. So like if schools or organizations that, you know, already are dealing and in need of approaches to kind of support their local communities, children within their local communities, they could adopt these things. Yeah.
From our research, we learned that hotlines and helplines are really struggling with being noticed by children and parents, or the support network that actually wants these tools, but they don't know how to access them. So I feel they would be very interested in collaborating potentially. But it depends on funding, of course.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe I'll chat with you then afterwards. Thanks. I think there were lots of questions. So,
Shall I address the meaningful one?
yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
I know. But again, we wrote a report with 50 pages that addresses the question. But to me, meaningful from the perspective of a child may mean something different than from our perspective. It can be meaningful from 1 hour to a 3-year-long program. So it's not about time. Often it's about kind of ideally co-designing it, co-creating the experience with young people themselves, even if it's just an hour long. How will the meeting look like? How do we think? What are the right dynamics and so forth? So co-created. Even if that's not possible, many of you some of you may work in the UN sector, or we do research on young people. So we do focus groups or consultations and the like, which may not be inherently meaningful. I think meaningful is what you then help the child get out of it. So if you do a consultation, maybe afterwards connect the child to internship opportunities or experts. So even meaningful may not be perfect in the moment, but you can set up a meaningful overall experience.
Harunia.
Hi there. First of all, I have a question for Luka and I have a question for Michael. Michael, you gave a guest lecture at La University 5 years ago. I was in your class. I was in your class. I still remember it. Sorry.
It's a bit of a delayed question, but okay, you had a few years to think.
I remember this lecture, and I'm very glad to see you again. You speak about kids having sort of an innate desire to make things. And unfortunately, what we've seen over the last several years is a pattern of something being created, growing to a point where it has influence, it being acquired, and then hundreds of thousands of users leaving en masse from this platform to another. For example, Blue Sky and Mastodon with the Reddit acquisition and the Twitter acquisition. Can this cycle be broken or interfered with in some way? And do you think that collective ownership solves a problem like this? Is my first question. Should I wait to ask the second one or ask it right after?
I think we should protect a few because we're out of time.
Yeah.
Oh, sure then.
No.
Sorry,
Ask your question. Ask your question.
I think the idea of Aurelia might get a few others.
Exactly, and then we'll group some of the questions. But go ahead, please.
So Luka, my question is about Flaggy and such content moderation tools. We've seen, and you've spoken about how it's important for kids to have spaces to be heard, especially when it comes to platform regulation. And I've been watching the New York mayoral tendency of Zohar Mamdani, and he's been doing this with children at press conferences where he has a smaller podium and invites them also to speak about issues that are affecting them as children in New York. I think that subjects like this are an inherently political issue. So do you think, how can we begin to involve children in as voices in these processes regarding conversations about them and their well-being?
Yes, thank you very much. My question is also to Luka then, on the pile. I'm the president of Limits, which is the Dutch Safer Internet Center, hence the hotline and the helpline. I'm as well president of InHope, which is all the hotlines globally. So I'm going to help you how we can increase this, because Flaggy, I think, is a very good idea. I already suggested something similar to the Commission, because it would make it easier for us as safer internet centers. But my question is and I don't know if that's already part of it, we look at this material, we analyze whether it's illegal, yes or no, and when it's illegal, then we can send a notice of taking as trusted flagger. But we can do this because we have an exemption by law that we're allowed to do that. Because even if a minor flags something and a minor flags a nude picture of him or herself, according to Dutch criminal code, you're not allowed to share that. So what kind of safety measures did you put in there that you can actually, that you have a tool that is allowed to distribute illegal material?
I'm so sorry, I also have two questions.
Go ahead.
One is, in the US, it's very common for tech companies to directly partner with schools and get their technology integrated in schools so that kids get hooked on that system and then become adult users and consumers. And in the US, the structure is very challenging because in a lot of cases, there is not public consultation on whether those agreements are made. Children do not get input, parents do not get input. It's just made by the school system, who often are not very educated on the tech risks. I'm wondering if there is a different structure within the EU or if there's any effort to make a different structure there, because it is a very annoying and sneaky way that they're getting people hooked on these unsafe systems. And the other question I have is I work on AI risk and safety a lot, and I'm very curious about all of the emphasis on AI use here, because in the US we are seeing a lot of really damaging influences on children from early AI use. It's not even a de-skilling issue because children are just not developing skills. They're handing over these systems to AI instead. So like with vibe coding, children aren't learning how to code, they're learning how to prompt, and that's not the same skill. And there's also been a lot of risks that are like psychological harms and things like that, particularly with chatbots, because it's very easy to get those personified, and then you form a lot of codependent relationships and maybe don't form emotional relationships with actual humans. So I'm curious about why chatbots and AI skills are emphasized when we're looking at developing things for children.
Maybe we start addressing these questions, and then I saw for sure 2 more questions to take on. Who wants to start? Luka?
Sure, yeah. So maybe to address both questions at once for Flaggy. So you have more or less like a taxonomy of harms when it comes to content which is shared by children, from like just unwanted content to like harmful content, where you have like political hate speech, stuff like skinny talk, car crash videos, and then clearly illegal content. I think there's like consensus for example, CSAM content, that they should be taken down, and then it's not really a political discussion, right? This is more or less also enforced pretty well across all platforms. It gets harder with like harmful content, where like this is not well discussed between, okay, does this now also is should be taken down, or the content itself is not illegal per se, right? And I think it gets political by if this content should be taken down, but it's not so political in regards to can we provide help to a child which shares this. So the big step by Flaggy is like, okay, if it actually a child shares content where it's in need of help, where it wants to discuss this kind of help being provided by a trusted adult, this can always happen. And then it's something in the next step if the content is also being taken down. But as our research also showed, actually the content being taken down is sometimes not even like the most important thing to the child in this immediate situation with Flaggy, but actually like that this is being addressed also. And in regards to like scraping illegal content and what happens if this is the case. So Flaggy can only scrape public content which is accessible on the platform. So if, for example, a child would send a picture or something like this directly to Flaggy, this is not being scraped, and simply the trusted adult is being notified to have a closer look to this, and then actually their steps can be taken by, for example, informing the help network or even the police in some of kind of these cases.
Yeah, shall I go quickly?
Sure.
Sorry.
Do you mind if I just
please,
complement
please,
a bit the question here? So also at the moment, just also for contextualization, right? Like Flaggy is a chatbot with yourself. Like you chat with Flaggy, and Flaggy is not sharing that content with others. And one of the reasons, the reasons that we also went in and designed this with the children is that a lot of the content is actually not about illegal content, it's just things that they don't really want to see. So like you have a lot of these categories within the DSA that Luka also mentioned very nicely, but we realized there's quite a bit of a gray area of things that are not necessarily problematic, but just that the child says like, yeah, but this is not, I don't want to see this kind of irks me just a little bit. And it was also like to understand that context. And in the moment, the way kind of it's designed, and again, it's like at the moment very local with one school and one media psychologist at that school, right? Is to say like if he or she, that person's media psychologist would become that person of trust, to be able to kind of have categories of content, or at the moment it was also a lot of ads, we were there last week, of things that they are not wanting to see, to be able to kind of contextualize this within the class. It's about these closing these feedback loops for in a specific local community. So not necessarily then sharing or spreading that content further. It's very much more about individuals' interactions that you can discuss. But I'm happy to also we can happily show you also how it looks maybe after, just in light of the time.
It could then send a notice of data.
Yeah, but if you want, like these are all kind of steps that you can do. Like that is then kind of a question that you have then back to the child of like what should be the action. At the moment, the actions are just nothing, in the sense that they are just contextualizing it within the interaction with Flaggy and not much more. But as I said, happy to show you that like in a minute. So the bell guy is already here, and you all want to have lunch. So I'm asking.
It's pretty quick.
Yes.
One, I think that transient platforms that disappear and appear and people move, probably a good thing actually. I don't think it's a bad thing that things come and die and come and go. I think that's quite a powerful disruptive force. It's a really nice one, and it does counter some of the commodification worries. In relation to Callie's point, there's another panel right now, I think, on EdTech that Sure Nas is on, and that's if the answer to what's Europe been doing around EdTech and that, the answer is Sure Nas. And this is effectively trying to say that schools can't delegate technology decisions and give to Google or to Microsoft because they're not giving sufficient control. We can talk about that more. But the answer is also that, and I wrote a chapter about this, that it's very fragmented and it's a very similar situation to a lot of the US, especially in the UK. And I think that's kind of a common characteristic. The schools haven't got very much money and therefore they're very vulnerable. And the last thing on your coding part, for me, at least the parts I was mentioning, I see it fully as an instrumental thing. In the same way as when you build a fort on a sofa, you don't learn civil engineering skills. You're trying to learn how to build a community and to maintain a community. And if AI can be used as a bit of a way to disrupt the fact that otherwise we get take it or leave it decisions about design, then I think it's something to explore, but I don't think it's a thing to focus on, and anything that gets us around those take it or leave it decisions for design would be good. AI is just one example that's topical at the time.
If I could just add on the AI point, I think it's also like it depends on which AI and how it's being used. And then that again depends on what age are we talking about of people. I think with younger children, if there's a opportunity to decide which AI they should be used, then definitely it's possible to use an AI that has been given a persona where it will deliberately answer in a way that's meant to scaffold learning and be healthy and so on. So in Denmark, they're building something called a school GPT, which is just a way to have open weights models accessible to all schools so that kids can use an AI platform that does not send all of their interactions to American tech companies. I would also question kind of though that sort of assuming that just because you just focus on making it work, I don't think that necessarily means you learn nothing. Like it's just it depends on how the AI is explaining its answers. But just by looking over its shoulder, it will sort of you get some exposure to, even if you don't do the coding yourself, you'll get some exposure to the AI telling about the kind of things that it was fixing. Which will sort of, just like if you learn how to play music, you'll just be sitting in with musicians where you don't understand what they're doing, but it'll just be seeping into the back of your mind.
Thank you so much, everyone. We are very much aware that we didn't address the questions that were asked, the ones that were not asked in this room. This was a wonderful discussions, and we're all very approachable and are heading for lunch, so please join us for lunch so that we can continue debating on these topics. Thank you so much to all the wonderful speakers today. This was fantastic. A big round of applause for the speakers. And